All right, cool. What's up?
Do you like drugs and alcohol?
Welcome. I'm Ben Boyce. This is the Dr. Junkie Show. And today I wanted to share a cool interview with one of my students who's doing a podcast of her own. She's going to trim this conversation down and use it as a part of a bigger topic, which she'll talk about today. But this conversation was really productive and it fit really well with what this show is all about. Plus, it's a free pitch for her upcoming podcast, which will be called Dependence. I'll update the show notes in the future as her project comes together, so if you want to find it, just look for a link there. I don't do any advertising on this show for all the reasons I've explained, but I will say that if you're thinking about college and you're in the Denver area, or you want to move here for a while, it's super nice. And CU Denver has a program that means you can take classes that Maddie's taken with me. And if you want to record a podcast like this one, let's do it. It's a really cool program that seems to forge a lot of these sorts of relationships. Megan, who you might also know from this podcast, was also one of my students back in the day. Maddie's got a cool story and a great podcasting voice, way better than mine, and there's a chance that we may put together a project in the next year or so if some grant funding comes through. So if you enjoy this, stay tuned for that. Today, we're going to talk about beneficial drug use, addiction, 12-step programs and religion, capitalism, Christianity and the weird moral standards that get ignored when everyone claims to be a Christian in a culture, the prison system as a treatment for addiction, what drug policy in a quote perfect world would look like, and lots more. So hopefully you enjoy. Maddie Grace Levin.
Yeah, it's a five-part podcast series. So first one was War on Drugs Reprise. Second one is 12-step rehab in prisons, oh my, which is what you're being
Nice.
interviewed for.
Yeah, I like it.
It packs a bunch of information into one, but it just basically shows that our solutions right now are not working. I kind of introduce a little bit about rehab in the initial episode, the War on Drugs, how it's a inequitable institution. Third one is the Portland problem, talking about, how Portland and Oregon decriminalized drugs and it ended really badly. I have a conversation actually later today with an advocate for harm reduction in Portland.
Cool. Who's that?
Connor McGee, he works
Oh,
at
okay.
Rehab Sisters in
Yeah,
Portland. Yeah, I'm also interviewing Lisa Reveal, who
that's
works
here
at
in Denver.
harm reduction in Denver.
Yeah.
The fifth one is, well, the fourth one's my story, and then the fifth one is the solution, which I ask you, Connor, and Lisa what the solution is, and then I come up with my own. So it's basically just off a couple or like three interviews. The
Who's
whole one.
interviewing you for yours?
Know what?
You should think about that. I noticed I did a series 6 months ago on like some previously incarcerated scholars. Sean was one of them. They wanted to hear mine, and I was like, well, it seems weird to tell my own, so I had Megan come on and interview me for it. But it seemed to work a little better because there's things I probably would have left out that I wouldn't have realized other people would have wanted to hear.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll ask my dad.
All right, cool. What's up?
Do you like drugs and alcohol?
That's a interesting question that feels like it needs some preface. So yeah, everybody likes drugs and alcohol as long as we're using the term drugs the way we should. And we should get rid of the whole decoupled alcohol thing just to start, that alcohol is a drug. A drug just requires two things. One, that it does something biologically, possibly a lot of times mentally or physically changes your experience of life, but not necessarily. We think of things like Tylenol as a drug or cancer treatments as drugs as well, and they don't have any effect. So that's part one. It has to be something that interacts with us biologically, and this part's important, to either speed up or slow down things that are already happening. And the second part is what we should get out of the way right away. It also needs a moral story about it that is publicly known to some degree, and a way people talk about it. Given those two examples, yeah, I drank a cup of coffee this morning. Oh, it was excellent. I'm a big proponent of marijuana. I'm lucky I've lived in Colorado for so long because it's been legal, at least for me, for going on 10 years now. But so I drank some coffee to speed up my dopamine and glutamate. action, and I slowed down my adenosine, and then later I smoked some cannabis, which actually increased my cannabinoid receptor activity, which also slowed some of my other inflammatory and gave me some go juice and some inspiration. And I could keep going. I actually am somebody that enjoys a lot of drugs, but it totally depends on the person. There are a lot of people that take cannabis, and for reasons we'll probably talk about today, they have a very different experience. There's even people that drink coffee, and they have a very different experience. It's not enjoyable to them. So I think everybody enjoys what certain drugs do. Most people have experiences with using something to feel better, but only if we're using the definition of drugs that is the one I presented.
I smoked weed this morning. Did you?
Yeah, like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, me too.
It just is something that in my recovery from heroin and cocaine addiction from like going on 35 years now, I've struggled with addictions to all sorts of stuff. I've had a relationship with it where it's not negatively impacting my quality of life. And when I tell people like, oh, time to work on this article I'm getting ready to publish, set the bowl on one side and cold beer on the other, they look at me like, what are you talking about? You can't write they couldn't write a page if they did it that way. It just comes down to how individual brains and bodies interact with the world around them.
Right. We can get into the meat and potatoes of the podcast. I am using you as a source because you're very knowledgeable. So does 12-step work to curb addiction?
All right, that's another interesting question that I have to drag us on a bit of a detour, but I think it'll be worth it. I double-checked these numbers before we started because they actually change all the time now. 67% of this country, thereabouts, between 64 and 71%, on surveys still say, I am a Christian. All out, I am identifying as this understanding of what God is. And if you draw the curtain wider and say, do you believe in a God? 87 to 91% of us, 9 out of 10 of us say, yes, I believe. And most of those people actually believe that thing has the ability, if it wants to do something super nice for them, save them from an accident, fix their tummy ache, whatever, pat them on the head. That's something we got to keep in mind in our culture, because I think that's going to be a big part of the answer of does 12-step work. So our description of drugs is a really good way to understand addiction. It either speeds up or slows down things that are already happening in our bodies. And for some of us, instead of going to the gym and doing, a bunch of push-ups, we just don't want to, or maybe we're disabled in certain ways that make that impossible. So guess what? That avenue for speeding up and slowing down certain neurological processes, we don't got it. And for some of us, we don't have $1 million to blow on a jet flight tomorrow. So the thrill we would get from flying into space, shucks, we can't do that. And we can't go on the cruise, and we can't go on the hike, and we can't go ride go-karts. And we've lost a lot of our family members, and we don't have a support group. And all of these things I'm listing, my chihuahua's scratching. You're going to have to do some editing, I fear.
I definitely will.
All these things I'm listing are things that actually we go to substances to get. And so if we're talking about any treatment for substance abuse or addiction, a big part of it has to be figuring out what the hell was driving the behavior, and then trying really hard to not just strip those sources of contentment out of your life, but to do the opposite, to find healthy, sustainable behaviors and activities that can really accomplish the same state of mind that you were seeking problematically through desperate use of certain chemicals at dangerous levels, right? In that regard, as much as I have to cringe to say it, for a large group of people, AA does work for some things. By their definition of success, it doesn't work very well. If you use their definition of success, which is clean and sober, if you slip up and use once in AA, you're messing up and you have to now start over from step one. So by their definition of success, which is just completely abstain 100%, if you count the people that fully attend the program for a year and devote themselves to it and go to meetings for an entire year, something like 10 to 12% of them are still, quote, clean and sober. And we're not counting the tons of them that just left, that didn't stay for the whole year. That's a terrible statistic. But when I look at those people and the many around them that maybe used way less than they otherwise would have, I think what they're finding there is social connection, number one. And that speeds up and slows down a lot of those same things. It's what a lot of us are using substances problematically to replace social connections that have been severed for all sorts of reasons. And then number two, this is why I started with the religious stuff. It's a religion, and it is disguised so well to fit in with any mindset, even atheists. And even if you're an atheist, the 1 out of 10 people that would say, I don't think God exists, you've lived in a culture where for your entire life you've been surrounded by people who say they have some sort of belief and understanding of a magic entity who does special favors for them that the atheist just doesn't understand. You are very familiar with it, even if you don't believe it. And when a situation like addiction arises and you're in a position where nothing fucking works and I need a miracle, guess what? Suddenly the very idea of a higher power that you can't even really understand, but that can do things for you that you can't do for yourself. Oh my God, what a beautiful thing to be able to grab a hold of. And we're at Karl Marx's infamous quote about opiate of the masses. The reason religions work and stick around is they always adjust shape just enough to help the people in any culture that are in a shit position. The people who have to say, meek shall inherit the earth, and eventually I'll get my reward in heaven. There is always components that pull that off. Am I chopping on your end?
The wind is really making the Wi-Fi bad. Is it windy there?
Yeah, it's not terrible here, but yeah.
I think the connection between Christianity and the higher power of the 12 step is where you cut off.
All right, so even if you're somebody who is a complete atheist or who has grown up unfamiliar with religions, you still know there's a huge group of people, the vast majority, who have always insisted to you. They've prayed before meals. They've prayed as solutions to problems that are unsolvable, and it seems they still have a solution. When you've got nothing and you're just in pain and depressed and you've lost somebody close to you, they have nothing too, except they do. They have something that is beyond even understanding, and it's always applicable for anything. And that means, especially for people that have grown up anywhere in the 9 out of 10 that have been in one of those belief systems, even for the person who hasn't, for almost anybody that's lived in a culture like ours, when they get in there, it speaks to them because one, they're familiar with it, but two, they're in the most desperate situation most of them have ever been in. They need a fucking miracle. They do not know what to do. And suddenly when somebody says, you know, this higher power is the way to do it, and you got to recognize you're right, you can't do it. It is so tempting to say, okay, maybe there's something to this. So it totally makes sense to me that for some percentage of people in a culture like ours, a program like 12 Steps, which is Christianity masquerading as all are welcome until you get to the higher power and think about it at all and realizing they're saying steps 1, 2, and 3 are accept a higher power that can do anything into your heart and then follow what the higher power says. I've heard this before. It's Christianity. Almost 7 out of 10 of us believe that. So we're back to this. It feels familiar, and it actually buys you privilege in our culture, right? Even being able to say I'm working a 12-step program to anybody that knows you've struggled with addiction, that's a feather in your cap that makes them more likely to hire you or more likely to welcome you back in with open arms. And now you've got secondary impacts of, if my family isn't trusting me yet, I'm not getting that source of contentment and fulfillment and support. And the person who's just lying and saying they're going to 12 steps it's that powerful.
Yeah, it's like a cultural touchstone. We want everything to relate back to Christianity. Is he still digging?
He's barking now. He thinks he hears something. It might be the wind, but it settled down over here. I was hoping I don't have to put him on my lap. I might.
Oh, I would
He's
love that.
close. He's close.
So, 12th step doesn't work to curb addiction, or it works for some people and not for all.
Yeah, and to cap that, I would say it works in a way that, much like Christianity, I've never found anything in 12 steps that people get that works for them that isn't accessible somewhere else without all the baggage of saying you believe in a higher power that cannot even be named and saying you give up your agency and you can't do anything about it anyway, and yet then still twisting your brain into the pretzel of really trying not to use, even though you've already admitted you can't not use. All that stuff, I think, is a big part of the baggage that If it's social connection, there's lots of places to get that. If it's religious connection, there's a church right up the street, or better yet, an atheist temple. Like, go find some people like me who are trying to throw off that nasty baggage. I'm sorry if I ruin your podcast. You are free to cut the rants about religion that sneak in.
Like it. I actually, for episode 4, for my 3 years, I went to church, not on purpose. I was going to go support my friend because she's like renewing her faith, and I'm a spiritual person, and I think that being spiritual is really cool. So I went to church, and on my 3 year sobriety date, they had a guest teaching of talking about trials and tribulations. And I was like, wow, how fitting. How fitting. So I put in the podcast, I don't necessarily believe in Christianity or all of the teachings, but I think there is a similar narrative throughout culture. It's the addiction of addiction when you miss that social connection, you give up, you turn to drugs, usually because of the social connection that you're missing.
Yeah, and the way you said it, I'm fully on board. Spirituality, which when we use that word in our culture, we generally, and in most cultures, there's a word that means this. What we actually are thinking about is like a connection to everything. And if you can't figure out why you feel like that's missing in the world we all live in today, I mean, think about it for about 2 seconds and look out your window and be like, oh, where's the nearest forest? Where's the nearest place where you could get bit by a snake you didn't see coming? Probably a long ways away for most of us. And then add to that the lack of connection. The problem is that name the religion and just crack the holy book and read the first 5 verses of any belief and do yourself a favor and really force yourself to read them. The Bible starts out with a lie. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Are the heavens and the earth the first things that were created in the universe? You know what he creates after that? Light. Okay, I see what's going on here. And it goes on and on and on, but it's not that that means anything that comes from the Bible is junk. There's beautiful stories in there, there's allegories, there's horrible stories that you can read in a way that actually help you understand how not to be a piece of shit person. But it is side by side with commands to keep slaves and some commands to sell your children. And if your daughter is raped, you're supposed to actually give the rapist a chance to pay you for her, and then he gets to marry her and take her away. That's the right thing to do. If your sons misbehave, take them outside the city and stone them to death. These aren't things that I need mixed in the Kool-Aid of my morals. In fact, if I'm drinking Kool-Aid that has that mixed with love your neighbor, which one is going to impact me the most? Well, guess what? Whichever one is handy to me in the moment, and I might well become a Trump supporter because I can read those verses in a way. This is why I've gotten on this kick lately, is I have family that is supporting Trump for Jesus, and I can fully understand how they did it as a recovering Christian. It's just wild. I can't get through the exterior to even, they don't even understand my argument. They know they're right. There's nothing that he could do that would change their mind. They treat him the same way they would treat God. Does it matter that he killed everybody on the earth and drowned little babies 4,000 years ago? No, he's God. What if I did that? You're not my kid anymore, right? Again, you are welcome to cut all of this out, but the relevant part is the percentage of people in our country who claim to be Christians.
I am taking a physics class, and you telling me that your family, it's really hard to break through the exterior makes me think that they're really good insulators and they don't lose internal heat.
Yes, that's
That's really,
exactly what happens. And they know all the tools for it, which is to say, to keep heat in, you have to keep cold out, or vice versa. So it's that they shield their language. And it's hard for them to talk to me because I was a Christian for 35 years next to them. So I know what they're thinking and what they're saying in code when they're trying to say it in code. And then they get annoyed that I'm trying to tell them to speak plainly. But those are things that only Sam Harris once said, good people always do good things and bad people will do bad things. But to get a good person to do an evil thing, that takes religion. And there's something to that. Like that is the easiest way to get people to twist their own pretzels, moral shaped pretzels.
yeah. So why isn't incarceration a solution to beating addiction? And I know you might have to do some genealogical perspective for this.
Yeah, I think where we started is also worth starting. We've started all three answers with the same thing. What did drugs do? I'm in such a desperate place that I'm now resorting to this chemical and using it over and over at higher and higher amounts because it was working so well. And then I started to lose some of the other things in my life that gave me that same contentment. My job, I got fired because they found out I was using. My family, they sat me in a circle and said, you know, we really used to love you, but like we're on the verge of not loving you anymore. And in fact, let's practice that. Get the fuck out unless you come back to being a person we can love. Bye. Don't have that anymore. I'm locked in prison and now my very freedom is gone. And then you're in a place that not only like you're adding punishment for what we claim to think is a disease, but the environment of jail or prison is exactly what you would want to do to somebody if you were a moral monster and you saw that they were struggling a little with addiction and you really wanted to make it bad. Take away everything. Make them completely miserable so that whatever has been bugging them and hurting them so much that they're turning to medications to numb it or to medicate it or to make it better, make them focus only on that and stare at the wall for months or years and then throw them back out in the world and see how they work. And the same is true. The reason we do it is because the neighbors, the people that live in the community that now don't want that next to them. And their concern is, I don't want to wake up with, you know, my windows broke out of my car and my change dish is empty because someone was so desperate. But those people are still people. And to go back to where we started, this is a country where 7 out of 10 of us claim to be Christians. And when they say Christian, you can press them all you want. The closest you'll get to a hardcore answer of what that means to them is what Jesus said. Which I remember being, meet people where they're at, hang out with sex workers like he did his whole life, heal the sick, visit people in prison, give your money to the poor. If somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek. If they steal your cloak, give them if they steal your shirt, give them your cloak. I swear this is what it says, but we're in a country where the vast majority of people are like, if somebody's struggling with that and they're going to be dangerous because they're struggling with it, we should put them somewhere where they can be locked in a hole. It's a convenience thing where then we don't have to gaze upon the addiction that is caused not by broken people, but by people who are broken by culture. Humans don't just wake up one day and find themselves addicted and everything was hunky-dory the day before. They wake up slowly getting more and more addicted because it's the only fucking thing that works in a society where we've cut off and capitalized and started charging money for a lot of the connections and sources of contentment we used to have.
Do you think Christianity has been conflated with neoliberalism?
Yeah, oh yeah. And I didn't realize as a kid this was happening, but I was on the front lines of it. I think that's why I have so much empathy, or empathy is a hard one. It's true though, because I was them, but like an understanding of why people believe. I don't think people that are following Trump or that are selling out to, there's a whole brand new group of prophets nowadays that are using eBay, may as well be YouTube, to spread new prophetic messages that are every bit as vague and unspecific and sometimes outright evil. Like the same old, for people that haven't heard these things for years, since I was a kid, I've heard mega preachers on TV say 9/11, those airplanes flying into the World Trade Center, punishment for homosexuality. Hurricanes kill 10,000 people. We should have not let the gays get married. A bunch of kids getting shot in schools. That's because we have abortion in our country. Things that are clearly part of this schism between real Christianity and where it started to be dragged by some force, and that force seems to be the same as it is for everything. Humans are what they are. We're going to come to this question a little later. Until Nietzsche's Übermensch, the human that like gets beyond wanting to kill and steal and own and take everything in their area and just live the best life at the expense of everybody else, until we get rid of all those nasty urges, the ones that are the only reason we're here evolutionarily, we're going to keep doing the same thing. And that's a problem we're going to have to confront at some point, because that means there'll always be hucksters. Anything you want, somebody's going to try to sell you a little extra special version of it that's complete bullshit. And in capitalism, the system's set up, and this is why neoliberalism and Christianity have gotten in bed together in some circles. It's set up so that there's nothing to prevent me. I actually thought about this for a while when I moved away from Christianity, and ironically, my morals and ethics wouldn't let me do it. But it would allow me to write a Christian book about how God saved me from addiction and he's made my life so awesome, and go on the fucking road and stop at every evangelical church in this country and make $10 million in the next 5 years off of tax-free donations. I wonder why neoliberalism, it's because a group of people love that product, the faith talk, and it's this largely parallel to the recovery industry that you're very familiar with. A large group of people are desperate for some sort of new source of that old feeling of contentment. The part of religion that is arguably the best fucking drug in the world. It always works. There's no tolerance. You can use it anywhere for as long or as short as you want. Nobody even has to know you're using it. You can just be in your car and hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, right? And it works for everything. You're depressed? Try Jesus. You're anxious? Try Jesus. Need to calm down? Try Jesus. Didn't get enough sleep last night? Want that promotion? Worried about a car accident? All purpose, right? So I think that it was kind of a natural. Isn't that what neoliberalism is? The cure that fixes everything, the product that's so awesome, you need it even though you already have it.
Well, it's also that idea of what works in the private will work in the public. If you found faith in Jesus and that has saved your addiction, of course you're going to market that. It's
Yeah,
free. It's
yeah.
free.
Mm-hmm. You just buy my book and come to my seminar and donate to the organization.
Oh, and I'm going to volunteer at rehabs.
Yeah. We don't need to get dragged in the weeds, but like this is why Trump has had such success. You were in class, we talked about this a little yesterday. He's captured the media energy way better this term, but he did this in the first term too. He has been part of this. He's sold every fucking thing under the sun, including himself as a billionaire and a reality TV star for 50 years of his life. That was him. Gold-plated buildings, name on everything. Name on books, on steaks, on cologne, on vacations, on hotels. Every fucking thing. A college. The guy sold college, for God's sake. And he figured out how to do that. He figured out where the most money was, and he figured out how do you find out how to talk to individual groups of people with really good dog whistles, terms they understand, and it makes them all juicy inside, while other people don't quite hear them as dangerous. And he surrounded himself with the prophets that are online that most people wouldn't know, because you and I aren't spending our day watching prophetic videos that are unprovable, unfalsifiable, and never actually pan out to be anything. But the people that are, that proves that he is sent by God. And other people are backwards engineering the story of why God is appointing Trump. And they're using King Cyrus, who is a king from the Old Testament who was evil, but God used him to accomplish some things for the Israelites, as if God is so lame and weak sauce that he couldn't possibly choose a righteous person to do what he wants to happen on this earth. He's got to choose a monster. That's industry after industry after industry that's just ripe for millions of dollars because people need hope.
How do you think that ties into de Certeau's belief?
So we got to do a whole podcast about this. But de Certeau, I like that he used the term belief in his work, because he could have used lots of different terms like power, or he uses faith as sort of a synonym of it. But he could have taken different approaches, and he said you can think of how we used to have, hundreds and thousands, especially of years ago, as the world was more and more confusing, and tribes and cities were smaller and smaller, and people died younger and younger of more and more confusing things. We had no power. And so our faith was almost entirely in that God thing you and I have been talking about this whole episode, and we fucking meant it. There was nothing else. We didn't know why the mountain blew up or the ocean flooded in and killed everybody in our town. And we survived. We just knew all the time weird stuff happened. Granny turned green and died 3 days later, and I didn't. There must be some power out there, and it ain't me, and I am powerless against it. How much more belief and faith can you have? And how over time that faith transferred to a king who was for a long time considered to be appointed by God. And even in that transfer, lots of that power and belief kind of evaporated. Like, people would try to kill the king sometime. Sometimes people said, fuck the king. Sometimes people left the kingdom and were like, we don't need the king. But since then, that power has bled out into institutions. And as it has gone from God to the king to television and media, and then media itself is split into right-leaning and left-leaning and educational and entertainment and comedy. And the more these things have fractured, the more we still, quote unquote, believe them. But that belief is not really that strong, and none of us are ever surprised when the rehab industry, which we believe is what we're supposed to go to if we're struggling with addiction, When we hear the story that it failed somebody, none of us are surprised. And yet if somebody said, I'm struggling with addiction, what should I do? Off the tip of our tongues will roll, you got to get into a rehab facility. I'm sick, what should I do? Off the tip of our tongue, you got to go to the doctor. And if we hear the doctor gave them a bad treatment and they died, would we be surprised? Not really. Heard that story 1,000 times. Every one of the presidency, the politics, the judges, there were justices. There were the good people are that we've elected. Are you surprised when you hear a story of corruption? Not in the least. Over and over. So I think that ties into our belief in God. Nowadays, I think this is another reason it's a lot easier to deceive people about God, is that their belief isn't in this singular thing called God that is everything. When people say God now, what they mean is their Burger King God. They're your way, right away, have it your way, choose this, get rid of that, I don't want no onions, keep the slavery, get rid of the, sexist stuff, and there's my God. And we all have our own little version. Well, no wonder it's so easy for poachers to come in and create coalitions that'll buy their products.
I think you're saying this, but I want to put a name to it, the individualized blame. We're not surprised when people flunk out of rehab because we put that pressure on them. Well, you didn't try hard enough. Well, you didn't want it enough.
Yeah.
We do that because it's more comfortable than looking at the system itself and saying that it's not just bad apples in the bunch, it's bad apple trees.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's both pieces of it, right? We know that we don't have faith in the system, but like that's the last thing we're going to admit. Because if our faith in our institutions evaporates, there's nowhere left for it to go. There is no alternative institution. And those of us that have, like me not being part of the church anymore, me no longer being part of 12-step, those are two institutions that all of my faith in is completely gone in a way most people don't have, because I've engaged and they failed me, and then I've learned they're constructed to fail people unless you just keep pretending they're working. Really good system there. What you realize is like you have to build from scratch. You have to find a whole unique way that's like grassroots. That is so much harder than just being able to walk in the door of a building and say, fix me. And this is capitalism. I want to walk in the door. I don't even want to walk in the door. I want to get online and just put the address in and click fix me. I can't do that. The institutions fucking suck. So to get around us ever admitting that to ourselves, I think you're right. When we see people fail, our general reaction is to say, what a lazy person, or if it's somebody that does something awful. I use the example of Harvey Weinstein and Matt Lauer. We tend to say, those evil men, and then we promptly fire them and we hire new people and we pretend it's all fixed. And then when it happens again in 5 years, we're like, we never say, is the system built to like incentivize these sorts of men to end up in this sort of position? And if so, how could we adjust the system to just make sure those people don't end up in those positions?
Why do you think people don't want to dismantle the system? Why do you think it's easier to just exist within it?
Because it's comfortable for most people. The same reason that prison, even though most people would say they probably know it's not a treatment for addiction, still are okay with it unless they're personally touched by addiction, and most of us aren't on a very close personal level where it hurts us. A family member overdoses, or we ourselves struggle with addiction. We just don't want to see the consequences. We would prefer, just like when we have kids and we're like, they're going to fall in love someday and have sex and then get their heart broke. They might smoke crack someday. These are terrifying fucking thoughts, right? Your kid might get in a car accident and really get hurt someday if you put them on the road. It's really tempting to just find a way to get away from that thought and say, no, it won't happen. And so we take different approaches to doing that. But the most common one's just outright denial. So with our kids, a lot of us grew up in families where our parents said, you just don't have sex until you're married. Done. And they all get to rest cozy in their illusion that like, yeah, that's how kids work. You put it off until it does. Don't speed and always wear your seatbelt. Yeah, well, it doesn't always work. Some of us have lots of accidents anyway.
What does mass incarceration do to communities affected by the war on drugs?
Yeah, talk about generational and genealogical links that pass down and rebuilding the same system over and over. For as long as this country's existed, it's existed built on this idea of capitalism and freedom, on democracy, on all of us is equal, and that means I have the same chance at this as you do, so I better look around, figure out the fucking rules as they exist, because I didn't make the rules, and then really figure out how to play this game. And the game is get money. That is the game, right? In the US, and you can say, well, there's other games too, like get power, but you know what the biggest shortcut to power is? A big stack of cash that you get to keep because you can prove it's legitimate cash. So the way to do that is not to just work one job and make wage labor your whole life. No, you've got to save up a little bit of that wage labor, or maybe like Donnie, President D, be born with, a silver spoon that you can just sell off and then start your own businesses that the rest of us, we got to figure out some way to do that. But you get going, and what you have to do is get people to work for less than they're worth so that you can then sell a product or a service they're creating in mass, more than just one person, lots of people, and make profit off of their labor that you don't give it all to them. Because if you give it all to them, you're not going to have a business for very long. And those of us that are the best at that tend to do the best in this culture, and we're esteemed. We're held up as heroes. We become things called philanthropists, which shouldn't fucking exist. Billionaires shouldn't exist in a country where people are still hungry, right? That, I think, is the problem that leads us to what you've titled neoliberalism, and your audience is probably familiar with at this point if it's more than 5 minutes into one of your episodes or your podcast. But this system that has grown from that, which is like the ultimate outgrowth of basic early capitalism, where everything has been captured by this model, including the church, including the rehab industry, which a lot of people would think, how is that possible? It's like nonprofit. It's just 12 steps is free. It's held in the basement of churches. 12 steps is like a doorway in, right? 12 steps is the free version of what the software is that you really want the features that you're pretty sure the other version has, because you see the buttons you can't click, but man, I'm going to go ahead and pay the subscription. And then you find out that like neither one of these work really well, right? I wonder if there's another program out there we can find.
Would you mind sharing your experience with incarceration and drug policy? Just, a little soundbite.
A little soundbite. Yeah, sure. I was a mainline injector of cocaine and heroin. I was addicted to fentanyl in the early days when you could still get it from pharmacies without a whole bunch of hoops to jump through as long as you had a script. And lots of other drugs from late 90s. I got out of prison for the last time in 2006. So I had a pretty long stretch of like a month in jail, a year in jail, 6 months in jail, a year in prison, went back to prison after I got out. It's worth pointing out, though, I say all that none of my charges were ever drug related, because drugs are so inflated and expensive in the US that a gram of cocaine that cost $1 to make down in South America can sell on the streets by the time it's chopped with cutting products for $200 to $500 a gram. And that means people that are using, and heroin's a little worse. It's like $2 a gram to make, and it can sell on the streets for $500 a gram. And at every step of the way, people are incentivized to buy whatever they can afford and split it into smaller amounts and sell it to people, because there's always a profit built in from buying, 10 packages to buying one. It's going to cost a lot more to buy 10 times. So it's built to naturally get people to be drug dealers. But to really start my prison industrial complex connection, I go back to, I was 15 years old. I had already realized that it's been diagnosed as ADHD and then Asperger. And it's, when you read and Asperger is just grouped in on autism spectrum now. I'm just old. It used to be Asperger, but Asperger was a Nazi, so they didn't like his name. Coincidentally, it's called he called it Little Professor Syndrome, which makes a lot of fucking sense to anybody that knows me, that I just can't stop teaching people shit. But I'm 15 and I'm having a terrible time at school. I pop off at the mouth. People want to beat me up. Girls are starting to get interested in me, but a few times those girls have had boyfriends, and then I don't really know how to deal with that whole patriarchal nonsense. So the boyfriends and I bumped into weed, and it just, as we've already talked about, it did something very different in me than it was doing to my friends. So they were going out after school and getting baked, and by the time school was over, I was smoking, but I was like, how the hell you get through the school day? So I'm getting up in the morning and medicating before I go to school and then during lunch. And weed was illegal completely, especially for a 15-year-old in Michigan. So I frequently ran out of it. So one morning, it was like class is about to start, and a friend walked by and I was like, you got any weed? And he said, yeah, but I got no pipe. And I had a pipe. We didn't have enough time to go to our normal spot across the road, so we literally ducked out the front door and walked around a corner and leaned against the wall. And this is my 15-year-old brain, prefrontal cortex missing. Didn't realize there was a bank of windows into the home ec class and about 30 snitches inside that room. So I hit it 2 or 3 times, handed it to him, and a security guard came out the window. And he took off running, and long story short, he didn't know what to do when he came back. We probably would have been fine if he wouldn't have come back, because I just went to class and changed my clothes. I'm a criminal. Police show up, and this is my first interaction with the criminal justice system, and I'm a fucking criminal. I'm arrested. I'm dragged through the school in front of the perp walk at 15 years old. I'm suspended for, I want to say, a whole week from that school just for getting caught smoking weed, and now I got a criminal record. I literally have to go to court. Every time from now on I get pulled over, it's on my file, so the cops are now searching my car. I learned when I was 15, the police are not just good guys. They are a big fucking problem. That you found something that works for you and is positively impacting your experience of life and is helping you out a lot with awkward feelings, but it means you're a criminal and you're not willing to give it up. Now you've got to change your outlook on life. So, I mean, that basically informed it all the way out, up to and including through prison, when I was classified not as an addicted person, but as a property criminal. My crimes were all property theft related, petty theft, stealing from stores, just stuff to go buy dope so I could get well that day because I was addicted to heroin. So my experience with the criminal justice system gave me a really bird's eye view of how, if you wanted to design a system to make sure addictions happen as often as possible and that they're as bad as possible whenever they show up, you would definitely use the criminal justice system exactly the way we're using it. You would take people who are struggling a little bit and put them in places guaranteed to make their struggles with addiction worse. And then you would not even classify them as having substance abuse issues sometimes. You would actually want to stigmatize them as thieves, as criminals, as violent criminals, as whatever you could label them with, so that their lives continue to go back to the only thing that worked, the substance.
In a perfect world, what would drug and alcohol policy look like?
See, this is where the Nietzsche comes in. In a perfect world, we don't need drug and alcohol policy because we'll just use the plants we've been using forever and we'll take care of each other, and people will have a lot less reasons to problematically use because we'll love each other a lot more. In a perfect world with real humans, okay. Back to we have to assume there's always going to be hucksters and liars and people looking to take advantage and manipulate others. So we have to do something with regulation, as much as that sucks and it's going to cost some money. I think in a perfect world, we have regulated drugs. We encourage people whenever possible to use the least potent, most natural forms of drugs. And when they use those drugs, they go places to buy these drugs where there are lots of other services offered, from medical treatment that is largely subsidized by the sale of the drugs, to therapy, to access to doctors, to access to group sessions of not only people that are thinking about, I might want to try to quit. How do I do that? What are you all thinking? How do we support each other? But groups of users that don't want to quit. They just want to support each other. They just want that sense of community. And Dr. John Marks is just one of many people, he's the most famous, who have run legal experiments where they just give drug users heroin. And when asked, how do you treat a heroin addict? They say, you don't. There's no treatment for heroin addiction. What you do is keep them alive. And then eventually, every year, it's like 10 to 15% of almost all, it's a little different per drug, but most addictions, from alcohol to heroin to crack, 10 to 20%, depending on the drug, just they get better naturally. It's called spontaneous remission. They just decide one day, like, my brain's changed a little. I'm older. I can't drink as much. It's not quite as fun. I think I'm going to try something else. And without any treatment, without any AA or anything, no higher power, they just quit. That means if you can keep people alive and keep them from getting hurt and damaging themselves or being damaged by usually the cutting products in the drugs, not the drugs, for that time, you're doing everyone a favor. You're saving society money on treatment and possibly burying them and their family members the pain of losing a loved one. And you're saving this person, you're adding them back to the community at some point where they can now be an ally and an advocate, or they can go do whatever the rest of us do, work a boring job and help pay for the social ills we're always going to have to fix.
That's all I have.
Cool. That was Maddie, and I'll update her podcast info in the episode description as her project comes together. I'll also keep all of you updated on how our podcast grant searching goes. I talked about that in the intro. We're trying to put together a podcast that'll offer counter narratives of post-incarceration and addiction, stories from people who have suffered at the hands of a system designed to make sure both experiences, addiction, recovery, and post-incarceration, are incredibly difficult to navigate. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, love yourselves and the addicted people in your life. I'm Ben Boyce. But he's like digging a hole in the pillow right now. Here you go. So hopefully we don't deal with that. My wife's not here. She's teaching, so normally he's nice and quiet until she leaves and then he acts up.